Today, we're going to shine a spotlight on the food and the finance sector, looking at the fantastic carbon literacy work done at Oxbury Bank. This is a bank who lends only to farmers. I'm joined today by Carolien Samson from Oxbury Bank, who is going to share her experience of carbon literacy.
Thanks, Nicola. I'm Carolien Samson. I'm the head of sustainable banking at Oxbury Bank. From our perspective, 6 out of 10 of the top 10 global risks identified by the World Economic Forum in 2023 relates to climate and nature risks by the end of the decade. As a bank focused on agriculture, we therefore have to understand the implications not only of our operations, but specifically on customers so that we can manage these over the long term and finance food producers into the future. Investors and regulators also want to know what we're lending and that we are being responsible in our actions given these risks that we face. And we therefore decided to ensure that everyone in the company understands climate and climate risks. And when we say everyone, we mean everyone. We chose a carbon literacy standard because it allowed us to develop a tailor-made course that covers both the financial and the agricultural sector aspects of climate risk.
So just to sort of take that a step further, why do you think carbon literacy training is so important for all sort of segments of the food sector?
From the bank's perspective, we're providing term loans with an average term of more than 20 years to farmers, and those farmers are fully dependent on the natural environment. Knowing that climate change is going to result in more physical extreme weather events, while the farmers also need to decarbonize their operations to meet the demands from the buyers of their produce. So all elements in the supply chain is going to be affected um, over time. And therefore, it's important to understand it effectively from farm to fork in this case.
And do you feel personally the time that you've spent delivering carbon literacy training has actually been valuable then?
Yes, we trained 157 people in 2023 out of a total staff complement of about 170 people by the year end. And it was across all roles in the bank. So it means everyone understands the investor and regulator perspective, including our formal disclosure requirements that we have to meet. Everyone understands how their role either contribute to Oxbury's direct emissions, and everyone understands the challenges faced by our customers. We speak a uniform language, and there's a very broad understanding of the science and the terminology in the business.
In terms more specific to sustainable farming, do you think your colleagues understand how that specifically needs to be improved, how it's done, and has that supported their job role in any way?
So we do look at sustainable farming and various farming practices in the training. From our perspective, we consider farmers who engage in farming practices that make their business more resilient to future climate shocks to be a better credit risk for us over the long term.
Yeah.
And so we have spent quite a bit of time in the training to understand these kind of practices and enable anybody who's customer facing to have the conversations with the farmer and to be able to assess whether we think those practices is going to be useful for the future. So that's how we've managed to run sustainable farming from our perspective.
So to take that a step further, does that mean that you feel like your colleagues' understanding around in this investment regulations, has that improved since implementing carbon literacy?
So, I mean, relationship managers have reported that they're very comfortable engaging with customers and discussing baselining and farming practices broadly. But we've also explicitly in the training looked at the regulatory aspects. So we are expected to report in terms of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and we review the information and how information gathered by various people in the business feed into these public disclosures, so that everybody can understand that the actions that they take in their day-to-day work actually, in the end, becomes a regulated action on our side with a regulator that takes a view on it. We also look at it from the perspective of our deposit customers. So where we are getting people putting savings with us, where they should have expectations around how we're going to be responsibly managing that money from a carbon perspective and a climate footprint perspective.
Would you be able to give an example of a carbon literacy action pledge and how this has led to changes at Oxbury?
So many of our relationship managers have committed to obtain more detailed carbon footprints from our customers, but also to ensure that they capture and update farm enterprise information accurately. And that directly affects the quality of our public disclosures, and therefore feed into perspectives from investors and regulators. So that's been a real example of how people are seeing a bigger picture now around it not being just a question about has the farmer done a footprint, but all the information that goes with that.
That's great, thanks. And finally, how do you see your carbon literacy work developing, maybe within Oxbury, but maybe with partners or other work that you're thinking of doing in relation to the charity?
So our focus for the internally is going to be around some of these internal projects that we want to do, as well as embedding some of our customer projects and looking at case studies with customers, publishing those, and making customers in general more aware. What we have found is that customers really want information. So how do we provide that information? But we would also like to find means to share our learnings and our experience of doing the training with other companies who's thinking about embedding this or who's thinking on embarking on the process and wondering whether the time will be well spent.
That's great, and we would obviously love to do that work with you. It's very inspiring. I very much appreciate you sharing your experience today, Carolien. It's just great to talk to somebody who's actually being a pioneer in their sector and a leading light. So thank you.